Trader Money bags Africa's most impactful financial inclusion award. Nigeria's Eurobond surge ahead of Trump and Xi Jinping's planned meeting at G20 summit. Airtel to list on London and Nigerian Stock Exchange as 34 companies fall short of minimum listing standards on the Nigerian Stock Exchange. The program is Business Express, reaching you from Abuja, the nation's capital. I am Amina Nujaim. Welcome to the program. With $20 billion or more lying in wait to fund infrastructure by investors, the nation's economy gaining momentum, more searchlight is on the strategy being employed by the government towards profitable investment in the country. At a discussion with a delegation from Harvard Business School to carry out research on this, Vice President Yemi Osinbajo says the focus of the Buhari administration has been to industrialize the country in the next 10 years. Just as graduates from the school say, the surge of Nigerian economy could provide excellent report for students of economics all over the world.
Regulations and encourage more people to invest in that sector, and then cost-reflective tariffs and all that. That really is, where we're heading, and we think that in the next few months we will unveil a plan that we hope will deal with many of the critical issues in the power sector.
There is much for us to learn about strategy, marketing, organization structure, managing people, and very importantly, responsibility to society as it is practiced in your country.
There was a consensus that the country remains a land of immense opportunities for investors. Nigeria's Trader Money and Market Social Investment Initiative bagged the Africa's most impactful financial inclusion award at the Africa's Bankers. The organizers say the social investment program is thriving, especially in delivering financial products and services to the wider society. A statement by Laolu Akonde, Senior Special Assistant to the President, Office of the Vice President, lauded the organizers for the recognition, noting that 10 million people are to benefit from the program in the next 4 years. This is in addition to the 2 million Nigerians currently benefiting. Business Express is reaching you from Abuja, the nation's capital. In a moment, we shall delve into the business of the day, revenue drive to meet economic and development plans, but that will be after the break. Business Express will this Wednesday look at Nigeria's revenue drive and the renewed vigor in sensitizing the nation's tax system as well as citizens' perception of taxation. Dr. Neil McCullough is the Director, McCullough Consulting, based in the United Kingdom. Should I say welcome to Nigeria?
Thank you very much.
Good to have you on the program.
Pleasure.
From your understanding, what would your perception be of a Nigerian tax system?
I think the Nigerian tax system has improved remarkably over the last few years. There's been a big drive by the government over the last 4 or 5 years to try and improve revenue administration and to try and increase the revenue take. Primarily because of the fall in the oil prices, there's a real need for much greater tax revenue. But there's still lots of challenges. The federal administration of tax is fairly good. Some of the states administer tax fairly well, but at the local government level, there's still an awful lot of difficulties. So there's an awful lot more improvements that could be made to the tax administration mechanism.
Okay, now I'm talking about the NESG Fiscal Policy Research on Taxation. I made to understand you have a bit of knowledge on that. And
Yes,
what would that be?
So one of the things which the Nigerian Economic Summit Group did was it said, well, wouldn't it be interesting to find out what Nigerians actually think about taxes? There's a lot of policy work, a lot of technical work that gets done at the high level, but shouldn't we actually ask Nigerians what they think about taxes? So what we did was we fielded a survey that went out to 16,000 Nigerians all around the country in every single state, and we asked them what they thought of the tax system. And some of the results were quite remarkable and a little bit shocking.
What did they tell you?
Well, I think one of the most surprising, or I don't know if it's surprising, but shocking results was that a lot of people feel that they don't get anything back from tax and therefore it's okay not to pay. So for example, more than 20% of Nigerians answered that they thought that it was perfectly okay not to pay tax. More than half of Nigerians said that it was probably wrong not to pay tax, but it was entirely understandable. Only 17% said, well, it was wrong and actually it's a punishable offence, you should pay your taxes. And that reflects, I think, a broad dissatisfaction with the tax system. People don't see that the tax system is working for them.
So in your opinion, is there a way of changing the mindset of taxpayers towards paying and actually think it's wrong not to pay?
Exactly. So I think that's the real challenge, is that one can't just change the mindsets by persuading people saying, hey, you ought to pay your taxes. One has to actually deliver something for it. So we asked people a lot of questions about trust. Okay. And what we discovered was that an awful lot of Nigerians have very little levels of trust. So when we asked them about both federal officials, state officials and local tax officials, more than 70% of Nigerians said that they didn't trust them at all, or they only trusted them very little bit, which is not a very good score. And when you ask them why, one of the main reasons was we don't really feel that we're getting anything back. There's a sort of social contract in most countries where you pay your taxes, you get services. In Nigeria, an awful lot of people told us that it was a sort of reverse social contract. You don't really have to pay your taxes and we won't give you anything back. And that's the challenge. People were willing to pay tax. In fact, they told us that they would be happy to pay more tax, but only if they really see some service delivery coming back for it.
Okay, and what would you think should be done to change that?
I think there's 2 or 3 different things that need to be done. First of all, I think communication is absolutely key. In the survey that we did, we discovered that only 12% of Nigerians had actually ever received any communication in the previous year about tax.
Okay.
Most people know very little about the taxes that they're supposed to pay. If they're paying PAYE, that's easy. It's deducted straight from your income if you're in a formal sector job. But most people aren't in formal sector jobs. Most people are paying other forms of tax. It might be a business premises tax, or it might be some tenancy rate or something of that kind. And in those situations, a lot of people aren't getting any real information about taxes. They're not being communicated with by the government. So the first thing, I suppose, is to communicate. The second thing is that there's a lot of improvements, as I said at the beginning, on tax administration, on actually just enforcing taxes. One of the things that we found was that people who felt that the penalties for tax evasion were high were much more likely to say that you ought to pay your tax. So there's a weakness in tax administration which can be improved and which would therefore bump things. But perhaps the most important thing is this building of trust. Working with communities, listening to their voices and ensuring that those taxes are used for the purposes which they're supposed to be used for, the delivery of services, in order for people to see that they're getting something back from the taxes that they're paying.
Okay, now we had spoken about remodeling the minds of Nigerians and the tax system. So if you had an ideal model of how the perfect results would be achieved, what would that be?
Oh gosh, I have no idea what the perfect model would be. But I think it's important to take incremental steps. And as I say, a lot of that will be on the communication side of things. So it's very important that tax officials are seen to be trustworthy. We went and did a set of focus group discussions with people all around the country. And one of the challenges we had was that whilst the views were mixed, some people said, no, the tax officials are great, they're fine, you can deal with them. Others had very negative experiences of their tax officials. They felt that, for example, an example which was quite often given was that somebody comes to your store and they say, I'm going to lock up your store unless you pay. And you say, oh, don't do that, please. Show me the piece of paper that says I have to pay something. And they say, oh, no, I'm not showing you the piece of paper. And say, how much do I have to pay? I have to pay this much. I say, well, I haven't got that much. Okay, how about half that amount? So it becomes a negotiation, a face-to-face negotiation.
Okay.
And that destroys people's trust in the tax system. You wonder, well, this money that I'm going to be giving you in tax, is it really going to the tax system? And is it going to pay for services? Or is it going somewhere else? And so a key thing is to try and build people's trust in the tax system, make sure that they're confident. So for example, a lot of people spoke about point-of-service payment machines. Some taxes are used with point-of-service payment machines. Some taxes you have to go to the bank you make the payment, then you get a receipt, and then you go to the tax office and you show that you've paid. Those systems people liked, because they knew that the money was going to an official source, it was going to be used as revenue, and therefore it was going to actually deliver something. So measures like that would help to build people's trust in the tax system.
Okay, and talking about the Better Tax Initiative, and earlier on you were talking about communication and interaction with stakeholders. What would your comment be on that, the importance of communications with public sector stockholders, constant engagement?
I think that's absolutely central to Better Tax. This is the campaign that is being run by the Nigerian Economic Summit Group. And I think it's a very good campaign, because what it's doing is it's encouraging, it's pressing for the government to reach out to citizens, to reach out to the key stakeholders, and to engage in a dialogue and a discussion with them. Make sure that they're brought into the conversation. And the conversation at every level. So this tax legislation, a lot of people in the survey complained that there were overlapping taxes. There's double taxation. Sometimes the state government comes along to you and says, hey, give me tax for this. And then next day the local government come along and ask you for tax for the same thing. And you're going, hey, wait a minute, that's not fair. Because of overlaps or a lack of clarity in certain aspects of the tax law, those need to be improved. Then there already is a good tax policy, 2017 tax policy. That needs to be implemented in full. And then there's the actual administration. It needs to be improved so that it's trustworthy, so that it's professional. So for example, let me just give you an example of one of the challenges which is in the administration side of things.
Okay.
When we went to local government tax offices and said, well, we'd love to know how much tax you collected last year, they would give us one number. We'd say, well, how do you break that down to the different taxes? We can't do that. Okay. Well, do you have a database of taxpayers? No, we don't. Do you publish online what your tax collection will be? No. Do you have targets? Yes, we have targets. What are the targets? Not going to tell you. So there's a lack of transparency at both the state and the local government area. The states are improving a lot. A lot of them are now publishing this information, getting it online and so forth. But there's still a long way to go in improving the quality of the administration so that people really feel that they can trust it.
Okay, still talking about how things could change for the better. Now, what would the role be of the legislature for a better tax regime?
Well, I think the legislature have got a very important role. Firstly, as I said, there are some legislative changes that need to be made. And in fact, one of the things that NESG is working on now is a report which looks at all of the legislative changes. There's been a very long history of tax legislation in Nigeria, and some of that legislation is very fit for purpose, but some of it is not. The world has moved on since a lot of that legislation was made. In particular, there are all sorts of new technologies which are now available to us, which facilitate the tax process, which simply didn't exist when some of these laws were in the statute book. And also, as I said, there's certain things which are overlapping and confusing or unclear. And so having a comprehensive review of the Nigerian tax legislation would help deal with some of these issues of double taxation, these issues of, well, is it the state's responsibility or the local government's responsibility or the federal responsibility, and so on. But secondly, and I think this is equally important, it's very important that senators and members of the House of Representatives hold the relative institutions at the state and the local government level, the people who they represent, accountable for the performance of those agencies, both at the federal, the state, and the local level. You know, let's see how much tax is being collected. What was your target? What were the breakdown by different taxes and so forth? What is an appropriate amount of tax to be collecting? And also, what were the costs of doing so? So when we went, for example, to some local government authorities and we asked them how much tax they collected, they gave us this number. And then we said, well, how many people do you have in your tax authority? And they told us a number. We just took the number of people that they had in the tax authority and multiplied by the minimum wage. For some local government authorities, they were collecting less than the wage bill of the people in the tax authority. That's not a good cost of taxation. The cost of taxation should be 1 or 2% of the amount of money that you're collecting, not 100% of the amount of money you're collecting. So there's clearly big efficiencies that can be pushed through in the administration of tax in Nigeria.
All right, the president is yet to swear in a cabinet. Coming from a background of taxation, what would you suggest the tax policy should be for the incoming cabinet?
Well, as I say, the tax policy for the incoming cabinet should be the tax policy of the outgoing cabinet. The tax policy was made in 2017 and it's a good document. I think a lot of the problems which had happened in tax policy previously were resolved in the National Tax Policy document, which was issued in 2017. I think the real issue is implementation. And that implementation comes really in two parts. One is changing the legislation, and the other is really improving the administration. You can have wonderful laws and wonderful policies. Nigeria has many lovely laws and many lovely policies, but it's actually the implementation on the ground that really matters.
Well, we look forward to good implementation. Dr. Neil McCulloch, a director, McCulloch Consulting, based in the United Kingdom. It was a pleasure having you on Business Express today.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Moving on, Nigeria is to get a new policy that will guide, promote and protect the country's interests in the world of share business. A draft policy by the Federal Ministry of Industry, Trade and Investment is seeking to provide ways of enhancing shea butter output in the country. The concern is that Nigeria accounts for about 60% of global shea butter production, but has no place in the world of marketing and supply of the commodity.
We've got to have a unified force that the share of Nigeria is going to enter the international market, the level of Nigeria's share. And then all revenue must come back to our producers and our processors. People have been buying and then they will go and resell, and then all the benefits will go to them. Because you and me have been a bit complacent. But now we have come out and we are holding the bulls by the horn that the share sector in this country must be able to bring at least 20%, must be able to control at least 20% of the GDP of this country.
We are coming up with strategic interventions and objectives in the policy that will work in terms of the extension services, for example, providing data and statistics, monitoring and evaluation for the industry. The policy will make recommendations in terms of market access, in terms of processing, agro-processing, in terms of storage, in terms of access to finance, incentives for investment, especially with the private sector.
President Muhammadu Buhari recently issued a warning against felling of trees, and shea nuts are among trees being pulled down for firewood. Now, still talking commodities, gold prices slipped in early trade Wednesday while investors await the U.S. Federal Reserve monetary policy decision. Let's see how other commodities are faring. 14.5 billion naira additional funding has been made available to the agricultural sector, geared towards deepening activities in the sector and driving diversification. The Nigerian initiative-based risk-sharing system for agricultural lending, in a statement issued in Abuja, the amount was mobilized from banks after extensive presentation to financial institutions. It is said that the meeting followed the discovery that over the years, the agricultural sector had received less than 3% of total bank lending, leaving it largely underdeveloped and its vast potential for economic growth untapped. This, according to the statement, was why the Central Bank of Nigeria created NISAL to collaborate with all public and private sector stakeholders to fix broken agricultural commodity value chains and de-risk the sector to enable increased inflow of finance and investment. Airtel Africa plans to list on the Nigerian Stock Exchange as it prepares for full trading of its shares on the London Stock Exchange on the 3rd of July. The company has valued its telecommunications business operations in the continent between 3 billion and 3.6 billion, also comprises operations in 14 markets primarily across East, Central and West Africa. This is coming barely a month after MTN Nigeria listed on the Nigerian Stock Exchange, the first by the telecommunications company that sent the market on a very strong rally. European stocks edged lower this Wednesday ahead of the much-anticipated U.S. Federal Reserve decision on interest rate. Muplang Dakok has a summary of global markets.
Face-to-face meeting between President Donald Trump of the United States and Chinese President Xi Jinping at the G20 summit in Japan, scheduled for June 28 and 29, has been a welcome news for financial markets. Investors have taken solace in the latest development aimed at resolving the ongoing trade war between the two countries as stocks in Asia rose on Wednesday, 19th June. The Shanghai Composite rose 0.96% to 2,917.80. Nikkei added 1.72%. Hang Seng Index also topped 2.56% as of its final hour of trading. European markets edged lower ahead of a much-anticipated U.S. Federal Reserve decision on interest rates. DAX depreciated 0.08%. FTSE 100 0.33% and CAC 40 0.19%. United States stocks were marginally higher. The Dow Jones rose 1.35%, while futures on the S&P and Nasdaq were also both slightly higher. In Africa, stocks started early trade mixed. Ghana's JSE Composite, Nairobi's All-Share Index and South Africa's JSE Composite had positive prospects for the day, while Namibia overall and Tunisia's Tun Index were negative.
Information from the Nigerian Stock Exchange. Trading on the floor has sustained a losing streak for a third straight day this week to lose Wednesday in the red. The All-Share Index and market capitalization lost 0.15% to close at 29,792.72 and 13.1 trillion naira. Investors exchanged 1.333 billion shares worth 67.6 billion naira in 3,441 deals. Top trades measured by volume were recorded by Photoil, Prestige and eTransact. And now to the foreign exchange market. The Central Bank of Nigeria, CBN, has injected the sum of $210 million into the interbank foreign exchange market. What are the numbers this Wednesday? That brings us to the end of this edition of Business Express. You can access all previous episodes on YouTube, and you can also communicate with us on Twitter, and the handle is NTA News Now. Don't forget the hashtag BizExp. Join us again on Friday. I am Amina Nujaim.